Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about customer hardship, which is an important requirement for retailers and is something that the AER pays attention to. Connor James is the principal of Compliance Quarter and has a lot of experience in energy. I work with Connor and have been working in law and regulatory space for over 30 years. And Compliance Quarter is where we both work, and Connor's the principal of, and we provide assistance to our clients in relation to complying with regulations.
So this webinar will go for a maximum of 20 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. The purpose is really as a short refresher, and we're going to look at some of the obligations that apply with respect to customer hardship in those jurisdictions that have adopted the National Energy Consumer Framework, which is the NECF. So we won't be looking at the Victorian regulation today. We'll have a chance to look at that in a following webinar. So as for, why is this an important area? As everybody knows, electricity costs disproportionately affect low-income households. And over the last 10 years, the average electricity bill has gone up by 44%. And over the same period, wages have only increased by 6%. So we see in the news almost daily stories about the problems with affordability when it comes to electricity. We're seeing increasing costs of living for households and for consumers, and we're also seeing a dramatic increase in the electricity rates that people are paying, and at the same time wages aren't keeping up with that. So naturally, as a result, we're seeing more and more people who are what we would consider to be in financial hardship. The other issue that's related to this is the concept of ensuring that consumers are actually on the best rate that they're able to receive. And a comment from Rod Sims, who's the chairman of the ACCC, in relation to the preliminary report that he did on electricity price increases, is that even those customers who are loyal, you would think that loyal customers are the ones that get looked after, when in fact the reverse is true. And the more loyal you are, the more likely you are that you're paying for that. And that's a result of the benefit of shopping around. So, Anne, did you want to have a look at some of the risk factors that might increase the risk of somebody being in financial hardship?
Sure. And these are risk factors that the AER identifies and discusses. And I guess they're the sort of risk factors that we would anticipate causing people some financial difficulty. So it's the increased costs of living, vulnerable customers, older people on an age pension or people on disability pensions. If there is a change to the pension structure or a means test, that can have a flow-on effect. It's important to understand too whether it's a temporary financial problem or is it long-term. It may be that someone has lost their job or is suffering some extended ill health that has an impact on their income. Some of those will be short-term and some of those might be long-term. Gambling and drug addiction are other factors where money that would otherwise be spent on utilities will go into those areas. Domestic violence, which results in a partner having to go into emergency housing or things like that. Family breakdown, again, separation of household, having to finance two households, and not all of these things, of course, are going to be obvious to a retailer, but it is around the discussion that your employees, the call centre people, have when a customer rings up and identifies that they're having some issue in paying their bill. And it's about the people at the call centre being trained and able to recognise some of these risk factors, which would lead them to referring the person possibly to the hardship team if you have one, or discussing hardship policies. And there are some other factors that will show there might be some hardship. Payment history, which is a regular history of being late with payments or seeking instalment payments. Any letters that are written in by the customer, or emails, telephone calls advising that they need some assistance, anything from the Ombudsman where there might be a complaint about the way they have been treated, or if a financial counsellor is involved in assisting the family. And as we've put at the bottom of that list, the best thing to do is manage it early. Which comes back to making sure that the staff you have working in the call centres or dealing with customers in the billing space are trained and are aware of the type of indicia that relates to a customer experiencing some financial hardship, which should avail them then of your hardship policy.
Okay, yeah, so the focus of today was sort of looking at the fact that hardship is going to be more and more of an issue. It's a focus of the Australian Energy Regulator, who regulate the electricity market, and we're going to briefly look at, what are the actual legal obligations of an energy retailer. Energy retailers that have newly been licensed or that are in the process of obtaining a license might sort of look at this and say, well, why is it that we need to go and take these steps to help customers that are in hardship? And I think the answer is, there are really two answers. One is that energy is an essential service, and there's a clear connection between having electricity supply and the capability of somebody to get out of financial hardship. That's unlike other discretionary spending activities where you're not talking about an essential service. So that's the policy reason for this obligation. The other reason that a retailer should be concerned about it is, as Anne said, if hardship is identified early, then it can be managed early as well. And it's a lot harder to manage a customer's account if they've been on hardship for an extended period of time and debt has been allowed to accumulate than it is to identify the issue early on. So the general categories of obligations are that the Australian Energy Regulator has to approve a retailer's customer hardship program. That applies outside of the license application process. So under section 43 of the National Energy Retail Law, a retailer must, within 3 months of being granted a retail authorisation, submit that to the Australian Energy Regulator for approval. So the Australian Energy Regulator has a guideline and criteria that they use to assess a customer hardship program. That's available online. Copies of all of the retailers' hardship programs are available on the AER's website. So once the hardship policy has been developed and approved, then there's an obligation for a retailer to develop, maintain and implement the hardship policy. And the AER has an ongoing role in monitoring performance. So in the performance monitoring regime, the Australian Energy Regulator will receive regular reports about the number of customers that are within a hardship program, those that have successfully completed a hardship program, and the number of customers that have been disconnected. And they'll be looking to ensure that a retailer has an effective compliance program, a hardship program, where people are moving through the program to successful completion. So next we're going to look at the criteria that the AER uses when assessing a hardship program. And did you mind having a look at those different points? Sorry, Anne, you still online? All right, we might have lost Anne. So there's a few headings here, and basically this is taken from the guideline, which is used by the AER to assess a hardship program. There are a number of requirements, and those include, some of the less commonly understood requirements, that you have flexible payment options, including payment plans that include centre pay, that you have processes in place to identify government concession programs and appropriate financial counselling services. And so one thing that a retailer should have is a list of all of the concessions that might apply to a customer, the eligibility criteria. They also should have a list of all of the financial counsellors in the states that they operate, and an understanding of when a customer should be referred to a particular financial counselling service. Also, a less understood one is the obligation to offer energy efficiency assistance. And the reason for that is that by implementing energy efficiency, you're trying to reduce the customer's ongoing responsibility, liability with energy.
And sorry, Connor, I think I wasn't
Okay.
able to be heard before. Just in relation to that energy efficiency, that's something that some of the retailers wonder, how far down that track do I have to go? And it's, as Connor has said, it's really just making them aware of usage, and if there are other options or times of day when they use things, and things like that.
Yeah, but having said that, I do know that the AER are also looking for more than just standard energy efficiency advice. So they want to see, they'll want to know, the circumstances in which a retailer would offer energy efficient equipment. So they might do things like replace light globes with LED lights,
Yep.
and there might be circumstances where a retailer would be expected to do that at their own cost as well. And over time, I've been involved with retailers for a number of years, and I've noticed that the AER is looking for more than just a standard response to hardship. They want to see some innovation, and they want to see some effort put in by retailers to help customers manage hardship. And you can see that if you look at the approved hardship policies on the AER website. Some of the older retailers have hardship programs that I think may not have been approved had they been applied for today. And perhaps we will see the AER take some steps in reviewing all of the existing approved hardship policies, and expecting those older, larger retailers to make adjustments. Having said that, the larger retailers obviously have a greater capacity to do things in terms of offering financial assistance separate to the government rebates and concessions. And I think we saw Origin allocate some money in their budget, which relative to their overall profit was probably pretty insignificant, but allocate some money towards actually helping customers get out of hardship. And did you want to talk about the ongoing obligations of retailers with hardship?
Yes. So in this slide, you can see that there are certain obligations that once a customer is in hardship, these are things you have to look for. They're not to be charged late payment fees or ask for a security deposit. As you would imagine, I guess disconnection is to be a last resort. The whole purpose of the customer hardship scheme is to work with the customer and try and assist them to overcome their financial difficulty. There are payment plans that then can go into place to assist them. And that's an assessment of what they owe. Like with most payment plans, it's what the debt is and their ability to make those payments going forward, and that they are able to meet those obligations. There is a requirement that you cannot disconnect them for not paying an electricity or gas bill if the amount owing is less than $300. There's also the AER Sustainable Payment Plans Framework, which commenced back in November 2016, and this is about making sure that people can commit to an ongoing payment plan, and also you can't be charging exit fees or early termination charges, and that's an important thing to remember as well.
Yeah, so that early termination fee change came in on the 3rd of September in New South Wales, and that mirrors the situation in Victoria. And you can see the graph that we've included is from the AER State of the Energy Market report, showing the number of disconnections due to non-payment over time, and the regulator would be looking at that as almost a failure of customer hardship programs, because disconnection is a last resort. If somebody's not paying their bills, then there's probably a presumption that they may be in hardship, and that's something that would need to be considered prior to disconnection. Of course, there are customers that aren't in hardship and that just don't want to pay their bills, and for those, then that's fine. You know, one of the requirements on the customer side is that they show an intention to pay their bill if they want to be part of a customer hardship program. So not all customers have the intention to pay their bill.
And I think, Connor, that's a really important point, because these hardship provisions are really for those customers that are seeking to work with the retailer and, you know, pay their bills. As Connor said, there are those that just don't want to pay the bill, and it won't matter what payment plan you put in place or what you do, they won't necessarily respond. And an assessment needs to be made about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think the obligation is on the retailer to show that they've taken every effort to try and direct them into the hardship program, as opposed to just disconnecting that customer.
Oh, and I just wanted to say in relation to that graph, Connor, that I agree with you 100%. I don't think the AR would see that as particularly good news, because if you look at it, it's over from 2010 to 2016, and there's no real decline coming into 2016, is there?
No. And I think, you know, because we're seeing those wider economic pressures, we're also seeing further increases in the retail rates, then it can be expected that rate is going to continue to climb for this year. So we've got a list of 5 things that we think that every retailer should do, including, you know, retailers that have been operational for a while. It's fine to have a policy, but it's important that actual operational processes are aligned to a hardship policy. So it's always a good idea to review operational processes and ensure that there is alignment. As Anne mentioned previously, it's important that all staff be trained in customer hardship. So that includes the staff that are obviously dealing with customers, but also those that perhaps are reviewing accounts. And that ties back to the indicator of hardship being perhaps a change in the way that a customer is paying their bills, or a a sudden stop. Retailers should review their customer hardship program and consider if new ways to assist customers can be implemented. There's a requirement in Section 43 of the National Energy Retail Law that if a retailer does change their hardship policy, it needs to be resubmitted. But I also think that it's open to the AER to have a look at all of the existing hardship programs and identify gaps. And I think it's interesting to look at each of the hardship programs and notice that there is quite a bit of variation in terms of what a retailer will do. I think that all retailers should meet with financial counsellors and others in the community, because it's quite easy just to operate within a business but not to really understand your customers. And part of understanding your customers is understanding those customers that are having trouble paying their bills. Meeting with financial counsellors allows the financial counsellors to understand that, you know, your retail business actually has a customer hardship program. It allows you to streamline the channels through which financial counsellors contact your business. And then lastly, I think that all retailers, as an ongoing step, should be reviewing customer accounts and identifying individuals who may be experiencing financial hardship.
Yeah, and Connor, I totally agree with what you've said in relation to the AER re-looking at some of the existing hardship policies. You know, as we know, they're currently looking at the regulation of embedded networks and things like that, but there is also a lot of focus on customers being able to have information and choose. And I think that this space of how retailers treat their customers who are having financial hardship is another area that the AER is looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the end of our webinar on customer hardship. You know, as we said, it's going to be a pretty short and sweet webinar. If you've got any questions, you can either type them into the chat section or just raise your hand, or if you would prefer, you can just send either Anne or I an email. And as we've done with the other webinars on explicit informed consent and other areas, we will collate any answers to questions and then distribute them along with the slides and the recording of today to everybody who has registered. So I don't think we've got any questions at the moment, which is fine. So thank you again for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.